Arrival on the royal planet. The spaceship glided through the darkness of space, its engines humming softly as it approached the glowing planet of Silara. The blue and silver world sparkled like a jewel, covered in towering crystal cities and floating islands. This was the heart of the Silarian Empire, home to one of the most powerful alien civilizations in the galaxy. Inside the ship, Captain Ryan Carter sat in silence, watching the planet through the window. His sharp eyes studied every detail, but his face remained calm. He had been on many alien worlds before, but Silara was different. This was a place where humans were not respected, where they were seen as weak creatures compared to the advanced and powerful Silarians. And now he was being assigned to protect their princess. The ship landed smoothly on the royal docking bay. The doors opened with a hiss, and Ryan stepped out. The moment his black military boots touched the ground, he felt dozens of eyes on him. The Silarian royal guards stood in perfect formation, their silver armor reflecting the sunlight. They were tall, their skin shimmering with a faint blue hue. Their sharp, glowing eyes studied him with curiosity and disdain. Ryan ignored them. He was used to this. A tall Silarian noble stepped forward, dressed in flowing robes of deep purple. His face twisted in disapproval as he looked Ryan up and down. "So, this is the human." The noble's voice was smooth but cold. "This thing is supposed to protect our princess." Ryan remained silent. He didn't care what they thought. He was here for one job: to keep Princess Serafina alive. The noble shook his head and turned, motioning for Ryan to follow. As they walked through the grand hallways of the palace, Ryan took in his surroundings. The architecture was unlike anything on Earth. Tall glass-like walls that shimmered like liquid, floating platforms that moved on their own, and glowing energy lines that pulsed beneath his feet. Finally, they reached the grand throne room. There, sitting on a high silver throne, was Princess Serafina. She was beautiful in an alien way, tall, with long silver hair that floated slightly around her, as if touched by invisible energy. Her golden eyes glowed with intelligence and arrogance. She wore a flowing royal gown embedded with tiny floating crystals, which moved like stars in the night sky. She stared at Ryan for a long moment. Then she laughed. "This is my bodyguard," she said, her voice filled with disbelief. The room was silent for a moment before some of the nobles chuckled. The guard smirked. Even the noble who had escorted Ryan seemed amused. Ryan didn't react. He had expected this. The princess leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand as she examined him like a curious insect. "I was expecting a warrior," she said, "not a primitive creature from a backward planet." More laughter. Ryan remained still, his face unreadable. He had learned long ago that words didn't matter. Actions did. "I do not need a human protector," Serafina continued. "I have my own elite guards, warriors trained in combat that far surpass anything your kind can imagine." Ryan finally spoke, his voice calm and controlled. "If you don't need me, you can tell your father to send me back," he said simply. The room fell silent. The princess narrowed her eyes. She was not used to people speaking so casually to her, especially not a human. Before she could reply, the ground shook violently. A loud explosion echoed through the palace, and the walls trembled. The glowing energy lines flickered, and distant screams filled the air. The guards immediately pulled out their weapons, their glowing energy blades humming to life. Serafina's amused expression disappeared instantly, replaced by a look of sharp focus. "What was that?" she demanded. Before anyone could answer, the massive doors of the throne room burst open. A group of masked assassins in black armor stormed inside, their weapons glowing with deadly energy. The guards moved to protect the princess, but they were too slow. The assassins were fast, too fast. Within seconds, they had already taken down 2 royal guards. One assassin leaped forward, his energy blade raised to strike the princess. Ryan moved. Before anyone could react, he was already there, stepping between the assassin and the princess. He grabbed the attacker's wrist midair and twisted it sharply. Crack! The assassin screamed as his arm snapped. Ryan didn't stop. With a single precise movement, he slammed his other fist into the assassin's chest, sending him flying across the room. Silence. The entire hall froze, watching the scene in shock. The princess stared at Ryan, her golden eyes wide. Ryan turned slightly, looking at her. "Still think you don't need a bodyguard?" he asked. Before she could answer, more assassins rushed in. Ryan sighed. This was going to be a long day. The first battle. The air inside the throne room was thick with tension. The masked assassin Ryan had just taken down lay motionless on the gleaming floor, his weapon shattered beside him. For a moment, the room was silent. Only the flickering energy lights and the faint hum of the palace shields filled the air. Princess Seraphina stood frozen, her golden eyes locked on the human who had just saved her life. This was impossible. A mere human, moving faster than an Exilarian warrior, breaking an assassin's arm like it was nothing. Before she could process it, a high-pitched alarm blared across the palace. Then, chaos erupted. A second wave of assassins stormed in, their weapons pulsing with dark energy. The royal guards rushed forward, but they were too slow. The assassins were like shadows, moving with inhuman speed, vanishing and reappearing in flashes of light. Ryan didn't wait for orders. He moved first. The closest assassin lunged at him, aiming a plasma dagger at his throat. But Ryan's body reacted before his mind even registered the attack. He twisted to the side, the blade missing him by mere inches. In the same motion, he grabbed the assassin's wrist and drove his elbow into his chest. A single, precise strike that sent the enemy flying backward. Before the first body hit the floor, another attacker was already upon him. This one wielded twin energy blades, slicing through the air in a blur. Ryan ducked just in time, the blade missing his head by a hair's breadth. His instincts kicked in. In one fluid motion, he caught the assassin's wrist, twisted it, and slammed his knee into his ribs. The alien warrior let out a strangled grunt, staggering backward. Ryan followed up with a swift kick to the head, sending the assassin crumpling to the ground. A third attacker tried to strike from behind. But Ryan was already turning before the attack came. It was almost as if he knew the move before it happened. He grabbed the enemy's arm and flipped him over his shoulder, slamming him onto the floor with bone-crushing force. The princess stared in disbelief. Her guards, trained since birth, enhanced by psychic abilities and superior technology, were struggling. But this human, he was taking down assassins alone. And then she saw something even stranger. Ryan didn't just fight well. He fought perfectly. Every movement was precise. Every reaction was immediate, like he wasn't thinking, just acting. Like he had already seen this battle before it even started. One of the assassins suddenly teleported behind him, swinging a blade straight for his back. The princess gasped, but Ryan sidestepped before the attack even landed, his hand shooting out at the perfect moment to grab the assassin's wrist. He twisted, T-Rike, and the alien warrior collapsed in pain. Seraphina's mind raced. How? This wasn't human reaction time. This wasn't normal. Ryan caught her staring and shot her a calm, almost bored glance. Your Highness, if you could move to safety, that would be helpful. Seraphina's pride flared. A human telling me what to do. She gritted her teeth and lifted a hand, summoning her psychic energy. The air around her crackled with golden light, and a surge of force blasted outward, sending two assassins flying. Ryan raised an eyebrow. That's more like it. She narrowed her eyes. I don't need your approval, human. Sure, Ryan replied, effortlessly dodging another strike and knocking an enemy unconscious with a single blow. But you do need my protection. The battle raged on, but the assassins were beginning to falter. They hadn't expected resistance like this. Not from a human. But just when it seemed like they were gaining the upper hand, something changed. The palace doors slammed shut, sealing them inside. The room darkened as the energy lights flickered wildly. A deep mechanical voice echoed through the chamber. Princess Serapina, UKNOTESTAP. Surrender, and your DA will be quick. Ryan tensed. This wasn't just an assassination attempt. This was a full-scale coup. A new figure stepped into the room. He was different. Unlike the other assassins, this one did not wear a mask. His black armor was embedded with glowing red veins, and his silver skin marked him as Dravonian, one of the Xelarian's greatest enemies. His glowing red eyes locked onto Serafina, and he smiled. "The princess will die today," he said softly. Ryan stepped in front of her without hesitation. "Not while I'm breathing," he said. The Dravonian assassin chuckled. "A human. You are nothing to me." Ryan tilted his head. His lips curled into a small, dangerous smirk. "Yeah." Then he cracked his knuckles. Let's find out. The secret of Ryan Carter. The air in the throne room felt thick and heavy, charged with an eerie energy. The Dravonian assassin stood at the entrance, his red-veined armor pulsing like a living creature. His glowing eyes locked onto Ryan. But there was no fear, only amusement. Ryan stood his ground, his muscles loose but ready. He wasn't just prepared to fight. He was waiting for the enemy to make a move. Princess Serafina, still standing behind him, clenched her fists. She was furious, not just at the assassins, but at herself. She had always believed humans were weak, that they were nothing compared to the superior Xelarians. But now, this human was outmaneuvering, outthinking, and outfighting warriors that her own royal guards couldn't handle. And that made no sense. Ryan Carter wasn't normal. The Dravonian warrior took a slow step forward, his voice calm and mocking. "You are impressive, human, but your body is still just flesh and bone. That means you will break." Ryan's lips twitched into the smallest smirk. "So will yours." The assassin chuckled, then vanished. Not a second later, he was behind Ryan, swinging a plasma blade aimed at his neck. The princess gasped, but Ryan had already moved. Without turning, without even looking, he sidestepped at the exact right moment. The assassin's blade sliced through thin air, missing him by inches. Then Ryan spun, grabbing the enemy's wrist before the blade could swing again. With one brutal motion, he twisted it. Crack! The assassin roared in pain, his arm bending the wrong way. Ryan didn't let go. He drove his elbow into the warrior's ribs, then slammed his knee into the enemy's chest, sending him flying backward. Serafina stared. It wasn't just his speed. It wasn't just his strength. It was the way Ryan moved, like he already knew what was going to happen before it did. The assassin staggered to his feet, gripping his broken arm, his face now twisted in genuine shock. What are you?" he growled. Ryan rolled his shoulders. "Just a bodyguard." The assassin spat onto the ground. "Liar." Ryan just smirked. The assassin raised his remaining hand, his armor pulsing with a new kind of energy. The air around him warped and twisted, and suddenly, a dozen identical copies of him appeared, all shifting and flickering. Ryan's smirk faded. "Holographic cloning tech," he muttered. Serafina whispered, "You know what that is?" Ryan didn't answer. His eyes analyzed the shifting figures, his brain processing every movement, every fluctuation in the air, every microsecond of delay between the copies and the real enemy. Then the attack came. All 12 figures rushed him at once, their plasma blades glowing like fire. Most people wouldn't have been able to react in time. But Ryan was not most people. He didn't hesitate. His mind worked faster than humanly possible. He dodged the first strike, twisting his body at an angle that made the blade just barely miss his ribcage. His foot kicked off the ground, launching him into a controlled spin midair, avoiding another 3 attacks in the process. As he landed, he was already moving. His left arm blocked one attacker. His right fist crushed another's throat. His knee slammed into another's chest, knocking the air out of the enemy's lungs. He twisted just in time to dodge another plasma blade, then snatched the attacker's wrist and used his own momentum to flip him over his shoulder. One by one, the assassins fell, but the real one still stood, and he was watching Ryan with new eyes. "You're no ordinary human," he muttered. Ryan exhaled slowly, his heart rate barely elevated. "You're catching on," he said. Serafina had seen enough. She stepped forward, her golden eyes burning. "What is he talking about, Carter?" Ryan wiped a small speck of blood off his knuckles. "This isn't really the time, Princess." Serafina's patience snapped. "Make time." Ryan sighed. He looked at her, then at the remaining assassin, and then back at her. "Finally," he said, "I was part of an experiment." The room fell silent. The assassin narrowed his eyes. "Project Apex." Serafina flinched. That name, she had heard it before. Ryan's expression didn't change. "So you know." The assassin exhaled. "I know that humans shouldn't be able to move like you do. I know that your kind, your government, was desperate to match the power of alien species, and I know that the Earth Federation abandoned Project Apex years ago." Ryan's jaw tightened. "They told the galaxy that. But I exist, don't I?" Serafina felt a cold chill run down her spine. She had heard rumors that humans were experimenting with ways to evolve, to push their bodies and minds beyond their limits. But she had never believed it. She had never believed they had succeeded. Ryan turned his gaze toward her. His expression was unreadable. "I was trained differently, conditioned differently. The human mind isn't supposed to process movement this fast, but I can." Serafina whispered, "You can predict attacks before they happen." Ryan nodded, not in the psychic sense, but in a way that's just as effective. The assassin let out a slow chuckle. "So they really did it. They created something more dangerous than a Xalarian warrior." Ryan tilted his head. "What does that make you, then?" The assassin grinned. Then he vanished. Not teleported, not cloaked. He just wasn't there anymore. Ryan's heart finally skipped a beat, because for the first time in a long time, he hadn't seen it coming. The awakening of power. Ryan had never been caught off guard before. Not since Project Apex. Not since they had turned him into something more. Yet, for the first time in years, he hadn't seen the attack coming. The assassin had vanished into thin air. No sound, no energy displacement, no trace of movement, just gone. Ryan's entire body tensed. His enhanced senses scanned the room, analyzing the faintest vibrations in the air, the flickers of light, the shifts in temperature. His brain processed thousands of possibilities in a fraction of a second. Nothing. Serafina took a step back, her golden eyes darting around the chamber. Even she, with her advanced psychic abilities, couldn't sense him. What just happened?" she whispered. Ryan didn't answer. His instincts screamed at him. Then, a whisper of air. Ryan twisted at the last second, but he wasn't fast enough. The burning pain slashed across his side, hot and sharp. The assassin reappeared behind him, his plasma blade dripping with blood. Ryan's blood. Serafina's eyes widened. You're bleeding." Ryan barely registered it. He staggered back, his body reacting before his mind could fully comprehend what just happened. He was never this slow, never this vulnerable. The assassin smirked. "For all your enhancements, you're still just a man." Ryan gritted his teeth. The pain was already fading. His body was built to recover quickly. But the deeper problem remained. This enemy was something new. Ryan had fought thousands of warriors, trained against every known species, adapted to every kind of combat. But this was different. "Ryan," Serafina's voice was sharp, urgent. "What is he?" Ryan exhaled, his muscles coiling as he scanned the assassin again. This time, he ignored his usual analysis. He didn't just track movement, he tracked absence of movement. And then he saw it. A distortion in the air. A tiny flicker, a brief shift in the light itself. His enemy wasn't teleporting. He was phasing out of reality. Ryan's eyes narrowed. Phase shift technology, he murmured. Serafina stiffened. That's illegal across the galaxy. Only one faction was ever crazy enough to develop it. The assassin smiled. So you do know who I am. Ryan clenched his fists. You're Dravonian Black Ops. The assassin gave a mock bow. A pleasure, Captain Carter. Ryan didn't blink. He was already adjusting, already adapting. If this guy was using phase shift tech, then it meant his body still existed on a different frequency, just beyond normal perception. A normal soldier couldn't track that. But Ryan wasn't normal. The assassin lunged again. This time, Ryan saw it coming. He moved before the phase shift completed, anticipating where the attack would land. He turned his body at the perfect angle, letting the assassin's blade graze his shoulder instead of piercing his chest. And then, in a single brutal motion, Ryan countered. His fist shot forward, faster than human reflexes should allow, striking the assassin's chest at the exact moment he became tangible again. The force was devastating. The assassin's armor cracked. He let out a strangled gasp as he was hurled backward, crashing into the throne room wall with a deafening boom. Serafina gasped. Ryan didn't give the assassin time to recover. He was already moving, closing the distance before his enemy could vanish again. The assassin tried to phase shift. Ryan anticipated it. Just before the enemy could flicker out of existence, Ryan grabbed his arm, his fingers tightening like steel. You're not disappearing this time, Ryan growled. The assassin's eyes widened in actual fear. How? Ryan tore off a piece of the armor, exposing the delicate phase shift modulator embedded in his shoulder. And then, he crushed it in his fist. A loud mechanical shriek filled the room as the technology short-circuited. The assassin screamed as his body was violently yanked back into full reality, disoriented, unprotected. Ryan didn't hesitate. He grabbed the assassin by the throat, lifting him off the ground with one hand. Serafina stared in disbelief. Ryan's strength, it was unnatural. No human should be able to lift a fully armored Dravonian warrior like that. The assassin clawed at Ryan's grip, struggling. You shouldn't be this strong. Ryan's expression was blank. I get that a lot. Then, with a final, effortless motion, he slammed the assassin into the ground, knocking him out cold. The room fell silent. Serafina took a slow step forward, her golden eyes locked onto Ryan like he was something alien himself. What are you? She whispered. Ryan wiped the blood from his side. The wound had already stopped bleeding. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, finally, he looked at her. I was built for this. Serafina's heart pounded. This human, this soldier, he wasn't just strong. He wasn't just fast. He was something beyond human. Something more. And she finally understood why the Dravonians had attacked. They weren't after her. They were after him. Ryan Carter wasn't just a bodyguard. He was a weapon. And now, the galaxy knew he was still alive. The traitor within. The throne room was silent, except for the faint hum of flickering energy lights and the ragged breathing of the unconscious assassin at Ryan's feet. Princess Serafina hadn't spoken in over a minute. She was still staring at him, her golden eyes filled with something Ryan couldn't quite place. Was it fear, shock, respect? Maybe all three. Ryan turned away, already checking his wound. The cut on his side was deep, but his enhanced metabolism was already sealing it shut. In a few hours, there wouldn't even be a scar. Serafina finally broke the silence. You're not just a soldier, are you? Ryan didn't answer, not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't. The things he knew, the truth about what he was. It wasn't meant for Xylarian ears. And then, the palace shook violently. A deep mechanical rumble echoed through the walls. Distant explosions. Screams. Ryan's head snapped toward the sound. Another attack. Seraphina spun around, touching her wrist communicator. Control room, report. There was static. Then, Your Highness, we've been betrayed. A chill ran through her. Ryan's gaze hardened. Seraphina clenched her fists. Who? The voice on the other end hesitated. Then, a new voice came through, smooth, deep, and laced with amusement. That would be me, dear princess. Seraphina's breath caught in her throat. Cal. Ryan immediately memorized the name. Kale. That meant this was an inside job. Ryan had seen the noble earlier, the tall Xylarian dressed in flowing purple robes, the one who had looked down on him the moment he arrived. Ryan should have guessed. Seraphina's face was pale. You betrayed the Empire. Kale chuckled. Don't be so dramatic, Seraphina. I merely repositioned my loyalties. Ryan cut in, his voice calm. You sold her out to the Dravonians. Cal's laughter deepened. Oh, I did much more than that. Human. Seraphina's communicator crackled, and a new image appeared, a holographic projection of the palace from above. Ryan's stomach tightened. The shields were down. Dravonian warships were descending from the sky, their engines glowing blood red. They weren't sending assassins this time. They were invading. Seraphina's fists trembled with rage. You think the people will accept this? They'll never follow a traitor like you. Kale sighed. You think this is about power? No, princess. This is about survival. His voice dropped lower. You should know by now. The Empire isn't what it used to be. We're weakening. And the Dravonians. He chuckled. They offered me a deal. One I simply couldn't refuse. Seraphina stepped forward, her body glowing faintly with psychic energy. I swear on my ancestors, Kale, I will. Ryan grabbed her arm. Not now, he said simply. Seraphina whirled on him. Not now. He's betraying everything we. Ryan was already moving. Yell at him later, he said. Right now, we need to get out of here. The doors slammed shut. Ryan and Seraphina both tensed. Then came the sound of heavy footsteps. The throne room doors creaked open again. And they weren't alone anymore. The royal guard turns. The first figures to step inside weren't Dravonian assassins. They were Xylarians. Royal guards. Seraphina's own sworn protectors. But their weapons? They were raised against her. Seraphina took a step back, her heart pounding. You're my guards. The lead guard removed his helmet. His blue eyes were cold. Not anymore, princess. Seraphina felt physically sick. More footsteps followed. More guards. More traitors. Then came Kel himself. He strolled into the throne room, wearing the same mocking smile he always did. But now, there was something different in his eyes. Victory. He glanced at Ryan. I have to admit, human, you're impressive, but even you can't fight an entire army. Ryan's gaze swept the room. 20 men, maybe more. Armed, trained, loyal to Kale. Ryan rolled his shoulders. His side still burned, but he could already feel the pain fading. His body was adjusting. His mind was already calculating. 20 targets. 20 ways to neutralize them. Kale saw the way Ryan assessed the battlefield. His smirk faltered. Don't do anything stupid, Carter. Ryan's eyes flickered. I don't do stupid, he said. Then he moved. The last stand in the throne room. The first guard barely had time to blink before Ryan was on him. Crack. A single punch to the throat. Instant knockout. Before the next guard could react, Ryan had already disarmed him, twisting his wrist at an impossible angle and turning his weapon against him. The room exploded into chaos. Seraphina summoned her psychic energy, sending a wave of golden light crashing into two traitorous guards, hurling them across the room. Ryan, meanwhile, was a force of nature. Every movement was calculated. Every strike was perfect. One enemy swung a plasma blade at him. Ryan caught the attacker's wrist mid-air, twisted, snapped, and spun, driving a knee into the soldier's gut before tossing him aside like a broken doll. Another guard charged with a spear. Ryan dodged at the last second, grabbing the weapon and flipping the attacker over his shoulder. Cale watched in horrified fascination. This wasn't human combat. This wasn't even Solarian combat. Ryan Carter was fighting like a machine, like something engineered for war. And then, it happened. A royal guard aimed a plasma rifle directly at Seraphina's back. She was too focused, too caught up in the fight to see it. Cale saw. So did Ryan. And Ryan moved faster than he ever had before. The shot that changed everything. The plasma rifle fired. A bright, burning streak of energy cut through the air, aimed directly at Seraphina's heart. Ryan didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, faster than any human should be able to move. The plasma blast hit him instead, directly in the chest. Seraphina screamed. Ryan stumbled, his body jerking from the impact. The throne room fell into absolute silence. And then, slowly, Ryan Carter looked down at his chest. The plasma shot had hit him square in the heart, but he was still standing. The wound? It was already healing. Ryan exhaled slowly. Then he looked up and smirked. Cale took a step back. "Impossible," he whispered. Ryan cracked his neck. "You should have aimed for the head." And then he attacked. The betrayal and the grand escape. The throne room was a war zone. Smoke curled from the scorched floor where the plasma bolt had struck Ryan. A shot meant to kill. But he was still standing, barely flinching, his eyes locked on Cale. Seraphina had seen impossible things in her life. Her people wielded psychic energy. She had witnessed warp gates bending reality, and she had traveled to the edges of the known universe. But nothing compared to this. No Solarian, no Dravonian. No one could take a direct plasma shot to the chest and just smirk it off. Cale had taken a step back. His confidence, once unshakable, wavered for the first time. "You're not human," he whispered. Ryan tilted his head slightly, as if considering the thought. "Never said I was." And then he moved, faster than anyone in the room, faster than should have been possible. The traitorous guards barely had time to raise their weapons before Ryan was among them. His fists struck like steel hammers, his movements a perfect blend of human strategy and something beyond human. One enemy raised his rifle. Ryan caught the barrel, twisted it back, and fired, taking out another guard in the process. Another lunged at him with a plasma blade. Ryan dodged without looking, as if he already knew where the attack was coming from. His foot snapped up, connecting with the attacker's jaw. Crack! The guard dropped, unconscious before he hit the floor. Seraphina, recovering from the shock, threw out her hands, sending a psychic wave through the room. The golden energy rippled outward, slamming into three traitors at once. Ryan barely spared her a glance. "Took you long enough." Seraphina narrowed her eyes. "You're impossible." Ryan caught a spear midair and threw it like a javelin. It embedded itself into the last guard, sending him crumbling to the ground. Now, only Cale remained. Cale's last move. Cale exhaled, shaking his head. I underestimated you, Carter." Ryan cracked his knuckles. "Yeah, you and everyone else." Cale pressed something on his wristband. Ryan's eyes narrowed. A sudden, deafening alarm blared across the palace. Seraphina's blood ran cold. "You just activated something, didn't you?" Cale's lips curled. "It's over, princess. Even if you kill me, you're not leaving this place alive." Ryan stepped forward, voice calm. "Explain. Now." Cale didn't answer. Ryan moved faster than a blink, grabbing the traitor by the collar and slamming him against the throne room wall. The impact cracked the crystalline surface. Cale gasped in pain, his body limp in Ryan's grip. Seraphina had never seen anyone handle a Xelarian noble with such ease. Ryan's voice was low, dangerous. "What did you do?" Cale grinned through the pain. "I locked down the palace." Seraphina's eyes widened. "What?" Cale laughed, despite Ryan's iron grip around his throat. "You think I didn't prepare for this? The entire palace is on lockdown, including the hangars. No ships are leaving. Not mine. Not yours." Ryan's jaw tightened. "And?" Cale's grin widened. "And I just activated the auto-destruct sequence. Countdown to destruction." For a moment, neither Ryan nor Seraphina spoke. Then, a cold mechanical voice echoed through the palace speakers. "Self-destruct sequence initiated. Evacuate immediately. Detonation in 10 minutes." Seraphina felt her stomach drop. Ryan barely reacted. He simply sighed. "You maniacs and your countdown timers." Cale coughed weakly in his grip. "You'll never make it out in time. The hangars are sealed. The emergency shuttles are disabled. There is no way off this planet." Seraphina glanced at Ryan. But he wasn't panicking. He wasn't even worried. Ryan Carter looked bored. Seraphina's heart hammered. "He has a plan." Ryan looked at her. "Tell me there's a way out." She swallowed, thinking fast. "The Royal Archives. There's a secret escape route, but—" Ryan dropped Cale like a sack of meat. "Great. Lead the way." Seraphina hesitated. Ryan gave her a look. "Unless you want to argue while we explode." She spun around and ran. Ryan followed, leaving Cale coughing on the ground, defeated. But just before they left, Cale lifted his wrist comm and whispered, "Execute Protocol Black." Ryan didn't hear it, but they were about to find out. The race through the burning palace. The palace was in chaos. Explosions rocked the structure as the auto-destruction sequence tore through the walls, setting off chain reactions. Seraphina and Ryan ran through collapsing hallways, dodging falling debris and plasma bursts from rogue security drones. Ryan, despite his size and weight, moved like a ghost, weaving through destruction as if he had rehearsed it before. Seraphina wasn't slow, but she wasn't as fast as him. Not even close. Ryan grabbed her wrist mid-stride, pulling her forward, increasing her speed. She almost protested, until a massive steel beam crashed down right behind them, where she had been just a second ago. Seraphina's breath caught in her throat. Ryan didn't let go. He kept pulling her forward, dodging, jumping, leading. The world was collapsing around them. And yet, Ryan never slowed down. Seraphina had never trusted anyone more in her life. Escape? Not yet. They reached the hidden passage, a narrow tunnel leading down beneath the palace. Seraphina punched in the access code. Nothing happened. Her blood ran cold. No. Ryan stepped forward and simply punched the panel. The door hissed open. Seraphina gaped. That. Ryan didn't stop. He shoved her inside. Move. They dashed through the underground escape route. The exit was just ahead. And that's when they heard it. A deep mechanical growl. The tunnel shook. Ryan stopped running. And Seraphina saw what was waiting for them at the end of the passage. A Dravonian war mech. 12 feet tall. Armored like a fortress. Plasma cannons already charging. Seraphina's breath hitched. We can't fight that. Ryan cracked his knuckles. I can. The final revelation and the ultimate showdown. The underground tunnel trembled as the Dravonian war mech took a step forward, its massive metal frame scraping against the stone walls. Twin plasma cannons on its shoulders hummed with deadly energy, their cores glowing a violent red. The mech's optical sensors scanned the tunnel, locking onto Ryan Carter and Princess Seraphina like prey. Serafina froze. "This is bad," she whispered. Ryan rolled his shoulders. "Depends on your definition of bad." The mech's voice module crackled to life. Targetes identified. Princess SERAPH. Eine. Project APEX SEDUGGCT. Engaging termination protocols. Serafina's eyes widened. It knows who you are." Ryan barely reacted. "Looks like it." Serafina turned to him. "Why does a Dravonian war machine have records on you?" Ryan just cracked his knuckles. The mech's plasma cannon surged, aiming directly at them. Serafina grabbed Ryan's arm. "We can't fight this. It's a war machine. We have to." Ryan stepped forward. "No." Serafina gasped. "What?" Ryan's eyes darkened. "No more running." And then he moved. Apex unleashed. The war mech fired. A twin blast of plasma energy ripped through the tunnel, superheated air exploding outward in a violent shockwave. Serafina barely had time to brace for impact, but Ryan was already moving. Faster than humanly possible. He dodged left, rolling under the first plasma blast. The second shot grazed his shoulder, but didn't penetrate. His skin smoked for a moment before the wound closed up instantly. Serafina stared in disbelief. Ryan didn't stop. He was already charging. The war mech recalibrated, adjusting its targeting sensors, but it wasn't fast enough. Ryan launched himself into the air. His fist slammed into the mech's chest plate, and the metal bent inward like tin foil. Serafina's mind screamed in disbelief. That's impossible. But it was happening. Ryan ripped through the war machine's plating with bare hands, tearing out wires and metal components. Sparks exploded outward as the mech tried to counter. It swung a massive steel arm, but Ryan caught it. Not dodged. Caught it. He twisted his grip and ripped the arm off completely. The mech staggered back, sparks flying from the severed joint. Ryan didn't stop. His eyes gleamed with something primal. Something unstoppable. The war mech stumbled, attempting to power up its emergency systems. Ryan didn't let it. He leaped onto the mech's back, grabbed the exposed power core, and tore it out. The war machine convulsed, its energy supply flickering. Then it collapsed. A lifeless, smoking heap of metal. Serafina couldn't breathe. Ryan Carter had just ripped apart a Dravonian war machine with his bare hands. That shouldn't be possible. And yet, there he stood, barely winded. The truth about Project Apex. Serafina took a shaky step forward. What are you?" Ryan turned to her, silent for a moment. Then finally, he spoke. "I told you. I was built for this." Serafina's mind raced. Built. Not trained. Built. You're not a normal human. Ryan didn't answer. Serafina swallowed. "Ryan, tell me the truth. What is Project Apex?" Ryan sighed. He looked down at his hands, still covered in the mech's broken metal plating. Then, quietly, "It was an experiment, a classified initiative by the Earth Federation." Serafina listened in stunned silence. Humans weren't strong enough, not compared to Xelarians, Dravonians, or the other dominant species. We were always weaker, always falling behind. Ryan's fists tightened. The Federation wanted to change that. They took volunteers. Some willing, some not. They experimented on us, modified us, enhanced our bodies, our reflexes, our minds. Serafina's breath hitched. "How many of you were there?" Ryan exhaled. 200. Her heart pounded. "And now?" Ryan met her gaze. "Just me." Serafina felt ice in her veins. "They killed the others." Ryan's voice was emotionless. "No," he hesitated. "They couldn't control us." Serafina felt her stomach drop. Ryan Carter wasn't just engineered. He was designed. A human weapon, one that Earth itself had tried to erase. The Dravonians hadn't attacked for her. They had attacked for him. Serafina took a slow step forward. Ryan, if they know you're still alive, they won't stop. Ryan exhaled. I know. A loud explosion echoed from above. The palace was seconds from total destruction. Serafina snapped out of her daze. Come on. We have to move. Ryan nodded, shaking off the past. Together, they rushed toward the exit. The final escape. The underground passage opened to the wild Silurian landscape. Above them, the palace burned, explosions ripping through the sky as the auto-destruction sequence reached critical levels. A royal cruiser was parked nearby, one of Serafina's hidden emergency ships. Serafina sprinted toward it. We're almost there. But then, boom, a Dravonian gunship descended from the sky, blocking their path. Serafina skidded to a stop. No, no, no. The gunship's doors opened, and a figure stepped out. Not Kale. Someone worse. A Dravonian warlord. His armor was jet black, lined with pulsing red veins. His 4 glowing eyes locked onto Ryan. Ryan exhaled slowly. Here we go. The warlord's voice was deep and calm. Project Apex. Ryan didn't respond. The warlord smiled. You belong to us now. Ryan's fists tightened. Yeah. He cracked his knuckles. Come and take me. And then, the final battle began.